Hi there, John Bornschein here, and this is Cable Lane. I'm so glad that you're tuning in again as we continue our study of how old is the earth. Let me take you to scripture here, Psalm chapter 33, verse 6. By the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth. Indeed, this is the baseline of our entire discussion as we look at the 6 literal 24-hour days in which the Lord created. And in that, we can begin and move through the rest of Scripture and look at the very powerful reality that this earth isn't that old, perhaps 6,000 years or younger. And so let's look at a few more points to consider as we examine a young earth theory. Let's pick up with the diameter of the sun. Since 1836, a number of observations have been recorded, specifically at the Royal Greenwich Observatory and the U.S. Naval Observatory. After all of their trackings, what they have found is that the sun actually reduces in size by 5 feet per hour. That's right, the sun is actually shrinking measurably. It's been calculated that if you now reverse engineer that, 11,210,959 years ago, the sun would have been touching the surface of the earth by these measurements. That was recorded in the Bulletin of American Astronomical Society. Here's another one. Let's look at the Great Barrier Reef. There are many environmentalists in Australia who've been tracking the Great Barrier Reef, and they started doing this very specifically after World War II. There were a number of ship anchors and explosives that damaged the Great Barrier Reef, so they wanted to track how long did it take for coral to rebuild, and yes, rebuild the damage that had been done to the Great Barrier Reef. Based on their regrowth estimates over a period of 20 years, they concluded that the Great Barrier Reef wasn't much older than 4,200 years. How is it possible that the oldest, largest Great Barrier Reef of all the reefs of the world is only 4,200 years of age? Very interesting. Here's another point. There's an immense amount of pressure in oil wells. If you've ever seen videos of oil wells erupting once they hit a pocket of oil, you'll notice that it just shoots up, it erupts almost volcanic-like from the immense amount of pressure down in the crust of the earth. In fact, some geologists have tracked that the measurement there is about 20,000 psi. That's an immense amount of pressure. Holt General Science says that oil and gas are made from organisms that once lived in the sea, changed by heat and pressure, and into oil. In fact, the Journal of Petroleum Geology records that oil can form within 1,000 to 10,000 years. And yes, even according to the creation ex nihilo, they cite that rocks containing that kind of pressure can't maintain 20,000 psi for longer than 10,000 years. So we have all of these organisms as they've died and they've left their residue within the bottom of the ocean floor, and this absorbs into the crust of the earth, and through heat and pressure, we see this transferred into a state of oil. And then that oil is contained within an immense amount of pressure and it erupts up to the surface. That 20,000 psi can't be maintained beyond a 10,000 year period of time. That's pretty significant. Here's another observation with regard to Jupiter and Saturn specifically. Saturn has a very unique feature with these rings around. I used to love drawing it as a child because it was so unique, even within our own solar system, but yet we obviously have seen a number of unique planets even outside of our solar system. But here in our solar system, Saturn has this unique mark of its beautiful rings. Did you know that those rings are actually not very stable? In fact, they're eroding, they're degenerating, disintegrating, if you will, as they continue to spin out into space. If we were to reverse engineer that, those rings at the current rate of deterioration would have spun off long ago, even millions of years ago, if that number were accurate. How about Jupiter, for example? Jupiter has these wonderful moons. One in particular is very famous, is Ganymede. And we've been able to record some evidences of this particular moon that really cause consternation with scientists. scientists. Actually, listen to this. It was recorded in the Denver Post in 1996. Magnetic fields are generated by liquid motion of molten metal inside a body, yet Ganymede should have cooled solid billions of years ago. You see, Ganymede is still hot. It shouldn't be. So if Jupiter's moons were millions and billions of years old, they shouldn't still be hot. But rather what we're finding is they still are. Here's another one that's rather fun, especially if you're a creationist. You've probably come across this picture once or twice in your studies in which you've seen a riverbed in Texas that contains both human footprints and velociraptor prints. It appears as if either the velociraptor were chasing the man or the man was chasing the velociraptor. Either way, these two that should have been separated according to evolutionists by millions of years somehow are in the same time and space. In fact, one chasing the other. Quite interesting. All of this really just gives us an arsenal, if you will, of questions to ask those who are just emphatically strong in their thesis and theory of evolution. It really causes us to challenge all of those narratives because at the end of the day, we are told that something came out of nothing, that chaos led the way to order, or that somehow lifeless matter created complex life forms. None of that is observed today, and that goes completely against scientific evidence that is before us. So we are left to come right back to the origin of it all, that there was an intelligent designer masterfully at work in all of these details. So we're just getting started. We've got a lot more to cover next week. I hope, if anything, I have piqued your interest to tune in once again as we go through another list of things that make you go, It's going to be an exciting study. God bless you, my friends. Take care.